All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome into a special edition Executive Decisions. It's your boy Corey Parson, the fantasy executive, and today I get a chance to speak with a real executive, someone who's built championship teams for real. You know what I'm saying? Not just in the world of fantasy sports. It is a host of the Lombardi Line and the GM Shuffle on the DraftKings and Visa networks, and obviously best-selling author of Gridiron Genius and now Football Done Right book out there right now that you can order, and really just a guy who I really look at and admire as a bright football mind, somebody that I think, obviously a few years older, but probably have a very similar background. Thank you for your time this morning, Mr. Micheal Lombardi.
Corey, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, and it's kind of you to say all those kind words. I appreciate you.
So earlier I moved to South Carolina permanently, about 2021 post-pandemic. And last year I had went up to DC to visit the kids, and I was coming back, and in my Uber ride, I'm like, I got to find a podcast to listen to. And instead of putting on a podcast, I decided to download the audio book of Gridiron Genius. And I listened to the whole book. I mean, the flight was short, but when I got into the house, listened to the whole book, right? And I was just struck immediately by the first couple of chapters. Number one, red zone defense. And how Bill Belichick knew going into that season, that 2013 season, that red zone defense was going to be key. If you remember that season, the big red zone stop against the Baltimore Ravens, and then the big red zone stop in the Super Bowl versus the Seattle Seahawks. But really, the John Shaw summer, I believe the summer of 1996, with the Rams looking for their head coach, and you kind of assisting them in that search. To me, I've always wanted to see how the inside of the NFL organization worked. And I found that so fascinating. Can you kind of just briefly touch on that story?
I was when the Art Modell moved the team from Cleveland to Baltimore. I originally had planned to go there, and then Belichick didn't go, and I didn't want to go, and Ozzie was going to become the general manager, which we knew was going to happen anyway, which was great for him. But so I was going to go take a job with the Raiders, but there was a contract conflict. So I ended up having to come back to Ocean City, here where I am right now, and kind of wait it out. And during that time, I was at a wedding, and I got a phone call from John Shaw, the general manager, the president of the Rams, and he said, "Look, I'd like you to do a project for me about, what it takes to be a great NFL head coach. And I don't want you to give me names. I want you to give me a theory behind what makes great leaders." And I used this background that I had from Coach Walsh about him telling me to read about Tom Peters, him telling me to not be like a gym teacher, which is just roll balls out, like be a leader. And I spent he said he was going to pay me, never did, but he paid me in greater things than currency because I learned something tremendous. And I wrote that book for him. I gave it to him in November in St. Louis at his apartment. And then I went back and saw them. They were getting ready to play the Bears in Chicago, and we went through it again. And he completely dismissed it and went on to something else. And it's funny, Corey, I ran into him at a restaurant. My favorite restaurant in Los Angeles is a restaurant called Toscano's. Al Michaels eats there 4 times a week. And so he does. And so I ran into John literally after the Gridiron came out, and he had no idea that he ever asked me to write that project. So that's how compelling the story was for him. But for me, it was so good. It was great that I got a chance to do that, and I've learned from it, and that's what you read there. A lot of times, behind the scenes of picking the coach is more political. It's what I often say. It's about being It's about being elected, not selected.
Good job with that one right there. Now, with Football Done Right, I'm listening, and I'm listening to the top 10 coaches, and I'm going through the list, and I'm like, oh, okay, my boy made it all the way to number 1. And then when you got to number 1 and you said Paul Brown, I'm like, wait a minute, Bill Parcells? Me, born and raised Harlem, New York. You know what I'm saying? I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan, born and raised Harlem, New York. Dallas Cowboy fan. St. Raymond's High School for boys is kind of where it started, where it was like debating about sports back and forth and making $5 bets at the lunch table and things like that. But Bill Parcells in the Northeast has always been football royalty. to hear him not on your top 10. Now, in the book, you do explain, but explain to the people now
it hurt
why.
me, Corey. It hurt me. It hurt me, Corey. I love him more than anything. I do. I never worked directly for him, but I feel like I learned a lot from him through Belichick and through talking to him and being friends. I just, I wanted to put him in there, and I originally had him in there, but I didn't know how to quite do it, who would I have taken out? I can't take out Paul Brown. I couldn't take out Joe Gibbs. I think if Bill would have stayed longer at maybe the Jets or stayed longer in Dallas, then he would have easily won. I think a little bit of the moving around maybe affected me. I could have taken Curly Lambeau out, but he had so many wins. How do I ignore that, right?
Yeah.
And Shula, how do I leave the winningest coach of all time off the list? So Corey, I wanted to. In fact, I regret not making 2 10s, 10A and 10B.
And there you go, right there. It was interesting because I had never really heard of Curly Lambeau, and obviously that's the guy that Lambeau Field is named after. So that was a good bit of football history right there. Speaking of football history, I was reading Parcells' book. I think, and thank you for that inspiration. This past summer, the leadership and literature, it really took me down the path of some of these great stories. And Luke, I used to work with Luke Russert at Sirius XM. So that was his book is fantastic. But listening to Parcells, right, and he talked about after the first full season as head coach, and the Maras flirting with Howard Schnellenberger. And he said that when he found this out from his agent, that he called Al Davis and asked Al Davis how he should handle it. And I guess Al Davis put the leak in. Hindsight being 2020, now I understand the leak was Jimmy the Greek. And he talked about how he, went to Al Davis and how kind of Al Davis was able to maneuver that situation and get that right. Parcells, the team was losing. I believe Parcells had lost his father that year. But talk about Al Davis. And I know he's been a big influence to your career, but the fact that Parcells on the other side of the country reached out to Al Davis, was Al Davis just that influential in NFL circles, period, like to where other head coaches would reach out to him?
Well, there was a relationship between Bill and Al, and it started when Bill left the Air Force Academy as a head coach, and he was living in Colorado Springs, and Al kind of hired Bill as I don't know, a consultant, something, and Bill and him developed this friendship, relationship, and their ability to see the game the same way. It allowed this to grow completely. And so it was more than a friendship. It was a mentorship. A lot of Bill's ability to understand situational football, I think Bill would attribute it to Al because of the teachings of Al, and Bill's intelligence, which people can't overlook, was so good that he was able to take what Al taught him and then make it his own. So I think it was that mentorship. And, and look, he turned in classic Al Davis, he basically turned him to take a negative and turn into a positive, to do it your way. And it's a great lesson that I think most leaders have to understand and embrace. This is why I say all the time, they've never dedicated a monument to a committee. If you want everybody to like you, you're not going to be a great head coach. You got to push people. You got to demand. You got to challenge people. That doesn't mean you have to be an asshole, but that means you've got to be the guy, the driving force. And I think that conversation between Parcells and Davis kind of redirected Bill to the main thing. And I think if you said to me, what does Davis, Belichick, and Walsh have in common along with Parcells? They understand the main thing is always to keep the main thing the main thing. And that phone call got him to think the main thing is the main thing. And that's what they do so well. They understand what the problems are and never lose focus of that.
You always talk about the different styles of head coaches, and two things really over the past couple of months. After Colorado beat TCU and Deion was on his tour, in the background, he had a book called 360 Leadership. And I was like, that's interesting. And I thought back to, I was watching The Pivot earlier this summer, and they were interviewing Dawn Staley, women's head basketball coach, University of South Carolina. And she talked about how she was a point guard head coach, where she would get the staff together, get the people together, and she would distribute assignments. Would you consider the point guard head coach kind of to be like the CEO head coach?
Yeah, but I think that's what Dion does really incredible. I think what people have lost sight with Dion because of the sunglasses, the earrings, and the bravado, that Dion's a core leader. Dion understands the main thing. Dion can evaluate talent. Dion understands how to hold players accountable. Dion understands how to push coaches and players. There's a great video on Instagram I watched this summer, or no, it was in the fall. My son actually sent it to me. My son's a huge Dion fan. He's coaching at the Raiders. And he sent me this video and he said, Dad, you got to watch this. And it was a team meeting, the first coaching staff meeting between Dion and the staff. And basically, he put it on him. He said, if you guys want to be friends with these guys, it ain't going to work. Mm-hmm. And he told them why it wasn't going to work, because they're going to let us down on Saturday. Because I've been there before. I've seen this happen before my very eyes. The friendship relationship between coach and player will always come down. And I thought, he gets it, and I think Don gets it too. When you're the point guard, that doesn't mean you just give the assignment and walk away. You give the assignment and you make sure it's being done right. Remember this, leaders do the right thing. Managers do things right. So when you're the point guard, you want your managers to do it right. Yeah. You're the leader. You know what they need to do. And I think that's why she's successful.
In the book, you talk about people that have influenced the NFL. Obviously, the legendary show, The NFL Today, with Brent Musburger, and then Howard Cosell, maybe the greatest broadcaster ever. Even I was very young when Howard Cosell was around. I still remember Howard Cosell and read up on Howard Cosell and stuff. Today's NFL, and I'm not talking to Hall of Fame level because this could get kind of controversial, but influencer, people who have influenced the game. I got two that come to mind: Mel Kiper and Matthew Berry. And a lot of people are like, wait, Matt, when you look at Matthew Berry, he really has been very influential to a newer generation of football fans. And that generation is getting older now. What do you think about the influence of those two guys on the game?
Well, I think what Mel's done is taken something that started back in Cincinnati, as I write about in the book, in the drugstore list, with Jerry Jones, not the Jerry Jones, another Jerry Jones, and the Mancuso brothers from Philadelphia, and manifested that through, and made somebody bigger. I mean, Joel Bushbaum started it, but unfortunately he died way too young, and he wasn't, perfect on television. And so where Mel was good, and I think that just enhanced, that's what's made the draft so popular, is because everybody can identify with Mel. Everybody's a draft Nick. I mean, I started out as a draft Nick. I that's why I put that chapter in there, because to me it was important that, you start somewhere, and that influence. I go back to this, Bruce Springsteen watched Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he wanted to become a singer. Billy Joel watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and he wanted to become an entertainer. How many people have watched somebody do something and want to do something?
Yeah.
And I think that's important. Cosell needs to be recognized. The Cosell, this generation, what he's done for the league is remarkable. Monday Night Football, all the things I write about in that book, him not being in the Hall of Fame is a true injustice. And I'm going to keep pushing for it. And I'm going to keep pushing for Brent Musburger, not because I work for the Musburger family, but because I was a little kid. And when that music came on in 1975, I got so excited. There was nothing better than that. And so what Matthew Berry and what Mel have done have done the same thing to this generation that those guys have done. And fantasy football obviously helped. And then, of course, the gambling element of it all. I mean, my 100%. Lord, but Brent was talking about the gambling element before.
Back in the day.
Back in the day.
All right, let's get into the good stuff now. I decided to break out my South Carolina State University ball cap today because it is Hall of Fame U. Four pro football Hall of Famers: Harry Carson, Deacon Jones, Donnie Shell, and Marion Motley. That's more than Clemson and the University of South Carolina combined. So I kind of hold on to that one. But I remember coming down, when I was down here visiting my grandparents, and back in those days, BET would actually play college football games on Saturday. Yeah. And that's when I first saw Alcorn State and Steve Air McNair. And to this day, Steve McNair is probably my favorite football player of all time. I think Steve McNair should be in the Hall of Fame. And when I run this past people, no one seems to agree with me.
Yeah, I know this. He was a Hall of Fame. He's had Hall of Fame seasons. There's no question. I think the problem we have, and I look, after we beat him in a championship game, Tennessee, we played Oakland. We played Tennessee in Oakland, and we beat them. And I mean, I was on the field. I went over to him. I didn't go over to any of our players. I went over to him and said, I've never seen a player like you in my life. You're incredible. Like his will to win, his toughness, his ability to continue to do what he needed to do was remarkable. So I have great respect for him. And I know how great of a player he was and what he did for that organization. I think a lot of times these guys, they don't have anybody really helping push them. Like, who's bringing the attention to it? And that's what I try to point out in the book. If you have a good PR campaign, you can get into the Hall of Fame maybe before some others. I mean, the injustice for Sterling Sharp is incredible.
Yeah, you
incredible. It's just not fair. It's not fair that, one guy, Terrell Davis, only played 6 years, but that's okay. Sterling's played 7, but that's not okay. Baselli played, I think, 7, 8 years. He's an offensive lineman. Those guys play 12, 13 years. And yet he got into the Hall of Fame. So, and the object of this book was not to take anyone out of the Hall of Fame except for George Preston Marshall.
Yes.
The owner of the Washington team. That's the only guy that I think we need to have a discussion about why he needs to come out. And you mentioned Bobby Mitchell's from Savannah State. I mean, Bobby Mitchell was the first African-American player that played for George Preston Marshall.
Yeah. And he was there.
And that was in the 60s.
Yeah, and he was there for a while too. And it's something. These things tend to come around every 4 years. I guarantee you that'll be something on the list next year. I'm gonna skip past Romo and McNabb. I want to go to the logjam at wide receiver since you mentioned Sterling Sharp. I think Wayne hasn't got in yet. I'm not sure if Torrey Holt has got in yet. Then you got Fitzgerald coming down the pipe. You got Steve Smith coming down the pipe. And I think you got Antonio Brown coming down the pipe as well. I think Antonio Brown is our generation's Jerry Rice. What's going on at wide receiver in the Hall of Fame?
I don't think we truly understand the criteria for how to get in the Hall of Fame at receiver. I think we look at numbers, catches. We don't look at impact. And I think what Deion said earlier about his gold jacket compared to other people's gold jacket is true. Tommy McDonald was a returner, punt returner, receiver for the Eagles. He played for 4 teams. He's got 85 career touchdowns. He got into the Hall of Fame. He got traded actually for a kicker in an expansion team in Dallas. And, when you put some of these guys that are in, where does the bar go for everybody else? When I was driving to the stadium, again, the objective here is not to knock anybody out. Andre Reed's a really good player, but I never felt Andre Reed was a Hall of Famer. He didn't tilt, as Al Davis would say, he didn't tilt the field. He was a really good player, but I didn't think he tilted the field, whereas Larry Fitzgerald tilted the field. I think there has to be a distinction between and we have this problem in the league today. What is a number one receiver? I wrote a column for VSiN before in July about DeAndre Hopkins. He's not a number one receiver. The media says he is, but he's not. A number one receiver, the defensive coordinator is worried about him on every play. He's scared of him on every play. You're not scared of Hopkins. You're worried about him. You're not scared of him. Where Tyreek Hill, you're scared of him.
Yeah,
100%. You're scared of him. Number one receiver. Justin Jefferson, you're scared of him. There's guys that you're scared of. And so I think we have a hard time with that, Corey. And I'm not sure. One of the things, and this is what I did, and I probably left. I mean, Terrell Owens should have been in the top 100. Maybe you could consider that. But in every draft room, the receiver board has way too many receivers. I can remember Belichick walking into the Cleveland draft room in 1991, and he looked up at the receiver board and he says, Jesus, how many of these freaking receivers are we going to have on the board? There was 70 of them up there. And most draft boards have way too many receivers on it. And most draft boards over-evaluate receivers in terms of their ability to come in and make that impact. And I didn't want my draft board, which is essentially what I did in this book, the top 100 players, to fall in that trap.
give you a couple of quick recent current day topics before we get you out of here and on to your day. Is Deshaun Watson on a Ben Simmons career trajectory?
Great question. I love Deshaun. I loved him, and I watched him really closely this week on my computer. His accuracy is really not there. His decision making is really poor right now. He still as athletically he is, but he doesn't trust what he sees. And I wrote about this too. Remember Will Fuller, the Notre Dame receiver that he had
Yes,
in Houston?
he was humongous to that Houston team, and nobody talks about that.
Nobody talks about that, and I think he misses that. He misses that. Remember when Will Fuller didn't play for Houston, how bad it was? Like Deshaun wasn't the same Deshaun.
Yeah.
And so I think, now without Nick Chubb, they're going to have to change some things around. He's going to have to show that he's worth that contract because right now, the way he's playing, he's not.
100%.
And they have a really good team. And if he could play, I'm not saying he has to play as a top 5 player, but how about a top 10 player?
I mean, you look at the numbers, and I would compare it to last year. Jacoby Brissett was quarterbacking the team better than what we've seen from Deshaun Watson so far this year.
No question.
I'm a big fan, and I'm like, wow, this doesn't look right. Finally, I think that we are getting ready this upcoming offseason for a Eli Manning situation. I think Caleb Williams is 100% going to try to call his shot, and I don't think it's just about to do with the Arizona Cardinals or anybody. I think he wants to go to a coastal team or a legacy franchise. I think he'll look at a threat of going back to college. I think the NFL wants him to come out now. Do you think Caleb Williams is just going to say, okay, whoever drafts me, I'm fine with it? Or do you think he's going to try to dictate the situation?
I think he could try to dictate the situation, and he may succeed because there could be other options. You could end up with a boatload of picks and still get Drake May.
Yeah.
You could end up with a boatload of picks and still get Michael Penix. I think to me, what might happen is it might not be as easy for him to dictate because there's other options. Are we sure he's the best quarterback in the draft? Are we sure of that? I'm not sure of that yet. I think he's really good.
You've been the only person that said that so far, that he may not be the best. Everybody else seems like it's a slam dunk, no doubt, minus 20,000 number 1 pick in the draft.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure of that. I think to me, we still have a whole season ahead of us. And Penix has been unbelievable. Drake May, I think, is outstanding. So if there's other options, then the team that maybe if he wants to go to say the Rams end up with the 4th pick and he wants to stay in LA, then I think he could have a hell of a chance because he could say to the team picking 1, you go to 4 and you get a boatload of picks and we'll end up with Drake May or we'll end up with Penix or we'll end up with Sam Hartman. I don't know, somebody else. But there are a lot of good quarterbacks in this college thing. There's a lot of them in the Pac-12 too.
Yeah, and then we got a big weekend in the Pac-12 coming up. And I just finally, if both USC and Colorado enter that showdown next week, even though they put it on big noon at Fox, I figured they would have tried to figure out a way to make that a nighttime game. But I think it could do sweater game numbers. I think it could be legendary Georgetown versus St. John's game. I think it could be one of the most. I think it could be the biggest thing we've ever seen in college sports if both teams are undefeated.
Yeah, I do. I mean, they got to get by Oregon this week, which will be a challenge. Bo Nix is playing way better than I ever thought he could play at Auburn. That shows you how important coaching is for the quarterback position. I mean, look at DJ Ungalele at Oregon State. He's playing way better than he did at Clemson. So, yeah, I think that'll be a fun game. And look, even if Colorado is one, it's going to push because Colorado – without Hunter, you worry about them, but they're really good. Their offense is really good. And look, I thought the best thing that happened to Colorado was having to come from behind and beat Colorado State. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. It gives you mental toughness.
Yeah. So definitely. Listen, appreciate your time. The name of the book is Football.
Corey,
go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. No, I appreciate you talking about the book. I appreciate all you do.
No doubt. Football done right, setting the record straight on the coaches, players, and history of the NFL. Micheal Lombardi from VSiN, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Corey.
All right.